watched over the last 40 years, an issue with youth and the church and Christianity. And we wanted to do something visually that helped people feel like the church and Jesus had something to say that was relevant. So we went to work on this show, and I remember getting there, and actually it was a couple months after we got there, one of the most esteemed Bible teachers in our varsity said to us, "Hey, I think you guys should think about doing something on Habakkuk." I remember I had a degree in theology, so I'd say, Habakkuk, I think that's in the Old Testament. I'll go read it and see. And I remember reading through the 3 chapters of Habakkuk and thinking, that's too bad. The guy's lost his mind. Because the first chapter just added to my own sense of personal frustration about the world and how it worked. And the second chapter was really obtuse. I was a math major, so poetry, rooted in the time of Habakkuk was really difficult for me to understand. And when I got to the 3rd chapter, it was beautiful, but seemed really idealistic. Well, there was one thing, though, that kind of kept piquing my interest. And that was Habakkuk's journey. Because he went from frustration to hope. And when you read the 3 chapters, you go, how did he get from here to there? What happened to him? What was his experience? And what happened to me was the next 12 years of my life. Almost every single day, some time was spent in the book of Habakkuk. We began to look at what Habakkuk said, what the words were. We began to put them in context. We began to look at history and study history. We began to look at our culture and the issues. This is in the late 70s, and some of you remember what the issues were in our culture along those times. They were not peaceful times. They were traumatic times. And we began to struggle with those things, time and time again. Our family vacations began to be spent as photo shoots around the country. We made friends with people like Ron Sider, who wrote a book called Rich Christians, An Age of Hunger. We connected with the Seattle Symphony Orchestra. They actually recorded the original score that we did. We mixed down the soundtrack at the only studio in the Midwest in the late 70s that was computerized. And we kept it a great secret that was at the Playboy Club in Lake Geneva. It went on and on and on. It began to change our life. And finally, 5 years later, in 1980, we almost finished. It was actually a little later than that. We almost finished a show called Habakkuk. It was an hour-long show. It was a widescreen multimedia show. The screen was 50 feet wide, 10 feet high. And, it was an amazing experience. It won a gold medal. It won the top award internationally in competition against all kinds of secular, people that had money out the wazoo to spend on their presentations. And that's a whole set of stories in itself. What happened at that event and how people responded was truly amazing. We started with history. We started with Babylon, which it kind of seemed like that was where Habakkuk was placed. But as we began to look at other things in history and culture and what was happening to us, I have to tell you that it came to a day when it was hard to go to the grocery store and buy food of any kind. I began to think about issues of economic justice, and they began to apply to me in some new and different ways. I began to look at relationships with people here in our own country and in other places in the world in ways that I had never. I had grown up in a very religious family. I had thought about faith and religion a lot from a lot of different perspectives. But Habakkuk pushed me deeper and further into those issues than I could imagine, and ended up changing my life. profoundly. I'd like to say everything I learned during those times has stuck with me, but our family diet changed. The kinds of foods that we ate changed. The house that we bought, not just because of Habakkuk, but for other reasons, is a small house closer into the city than we might have chosen and might have liked. Habakkuk shaped that influence. I drive a Prius today, not because it's a sexy car, but because it's a good economic car for our world in terms of what it gives. Our giving, we never had a lot of money. We were in grad school and teaching. Our giving actually went up as we joined university, and our salaries went to a quarter of what they had actually. So we began to enter into a lifestyle that was way simpler, way more focused, way less material. Not all of that has stayed with me, I'm sorry to say. Doing this Café is a little bit annoying. Oh yeah, I believe this stuff. I have to think about that again. So that's kind of a fair warning about my experience with Habakkuk. And I will understand if any of you want to leave now. Habakkuk is a dangerous character. What he has to say, if you want to listen to it, you want to put it in our world today, is profound. It radically and totally changed my life. Well, let's look at that a little bit, and let's actually start with the historical context. Habakkuk is one of the minor prophets. It's a short book. It's only 3 chapters long. Unlike many of the other prophets, we don't know anything about his lineage, his family, or anything else. The only thing we know is his name, Habakkuk, and it doesn't show up in a lot of other places in Scripture. He is one of the only prophets called a prophet. In the actual title of the book, it says this is the oracle or the vision or the picture that Habakkuk the prophet saw. So he is apparently an official of some kind. I mean, he's recognized as a prophet. Some of the other famous prophets that we know about aren't. Some of them say, no, I want nothing to do with those guys who are called prophets. They stay away. He's one of the finest Hebrew writers that we have. Now, I don't say that in my testimony. I barely passed Hebrew. I'm not Tom. I didn't get into it. There is no danger of me lapsing into Hebrew and speaking to you today. That's not going to happen. But those who are scholars of Hebrew say this is a Browning, this is a Keats, this is a Yeats of the Hebrew language. His poetry is amazing. And my testimony would be the richness of the images that he puts out there and says he's an amazing writer. He writes from a personal perspective. Habakkuk's issues and concerns are his concerns. So as we look at the text in a moment, they're personal. Some of the prophets, like Isaiah, talk a lot about, and their hope is based on the restoration of Israel someday. Habakkuk creates space for that. But when we get to the end of Habakkuk, the issues are personal for him. They're his restoration of his heart and soul and belief and faith. It's incredibly personal stuff. There's no specific time reference in Habakkuk. There are in other books, the year that King Uzziah died or something like that. The only thing we know about Habakkuk is there seems to be some references to the Chaldeans, which is the warrior tribe of the Babylonians, and there's some descriptions of things happening in the world that indicate it comes from the time that Babylon is at its height. It's at extreme. So when we look at biblical history, the timeline, the time of a lot of the prophets are late in the United Kingdom through Israel and Judah, particularly the fall of Israel in 722, on up to the exile. There's a little bit of stuff that gets written down after that. And if we kind of zoom in, most scholars would say Habakkuk was written sometime around 600 BC, just prior to the fall of Jerusalem and 587. It is a time that's traumatic. There's a whole bunch of different kings in that area. There are changes in the world around. Babylon, Egypt, the Nineveh, they're within a 25-year period. There's just turmoil in terms of that. The kings during this time in Habakkuk's experience are, they're aligning here, they're aligning there, so it's traumatic. And what happens in Jerusalem is that corruption rises. It's not people begin to panic and they begin to do things that are not healthy. So Habakkuk's experience is pretty intense. It is probably the time of Daniel and Jeremiah. My guess is that Habakkuk knew Daniel's family. That they had some acquaintances with each other, but the text doesn't tell us that. It's different. So the book is a 5-part conversation. It's a very simple thing. It begins with Habakkuk's complaint to God, and we'll look at that in more detail in a moment. And then God answers Habakkuk. And we'll look at that in a moment. And then Habakkuk complains about God's answer to him. And then God slows down, and the second chapter is God, giving his answer in more detail. And I'm going to say it in a minute, I'll say now. It becomes a picture of how God works in all of history and what God does. And that leads to Habakkuk's final response, which is pretty amazing and pretty personal, and it's a beautiful picture. So let's actually go into the text and look at some of these things. So Habakkuk's first complaint. How long, O Lord, am I going to cry out for help and you don't answer me? How long are you going to make me see violence and do nothing to save? You make me see wrongdoing. You make me look at trouble. Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. The law becomes slack and justice never prevails. The wicked surround the righteous, and therefore judgment comes forth perverted. Do any of you ever have those kinds of feelings in our culture? Do you ever, to the song, we wrote that. But this was my experience in the 60s and 70s. This was my experience when I read the news this weekend, and I look at what some of the things going on in our world is, where are you, God? How come you're letting the things that annoy me and don't seem fair and right and seem unjust happen? What's going on here? Well, I said it's a 5-part conversation, and God answers Habakkuk. So, God's first response: look at the nations and see. Be astonished, be astounded, for a work is being done in your day that you would not believe if you were told. What do you think? How do you feel about that?
I'm not sure it's a work.
Sounds pretty good, right? Can any of you imagine if I were to say to you this morning, God's doing a work in your day that will surprise you and astonish you? What kinds of things would you have in mind? What would you be thinking about and hoping for that God might be doing? Political situations, economic situations, or immigration situations, and God's, okay, good. Actually, I think I might say we're always astonished and astounded by what God's doing. It's always a bit of a surprise to us, and it certainly was for Habakkuk. For I am rousing the Chaldeans, that fierce and impetuous nation who marched through the breadth of the earth to seize dwellings not their own. Dread and fearsome are they. Their justice and dignity proceed from themselves. And then Habakkuk goes into a description of some of the military techniques of the day that helped the Babylonians, do what they did. And it ends with they sweep by like the wind. They transgress and become guilty. Their own might is their God. How do you feel about that? How would you feel if that was God's answer to you this morning as you said, God, where are you? What are you doing? I'm waiting for you to show up. He said, don't worry. I'm raising it up. Somebody we don't like. Somebody we're afraid of. Somebody that brings destruction. Somebody whose own mind is their God. Well, that's God's first answer to Habakkuk. What do you think? Well, how would you respond?
How do you expect us to persuade or believe that you're good if you allow us to happen?
Yeah. What? Well, can you imagine how Habakkuk responded? What? You're doing what? You can't do that, God! You can't do that! And Habakkuk's feelings are based upon what Habakkuk knows about God. He actually has a pretty strong idea about God. When we look at the text, we find, are you not from of old, O Lord my God, my Holy One? You shall not die. O Lord, you have marked them for judgments, and you, O rock, have established them for punishment. He understands that God is holy, that God is eternal, God is ongoing. He understands that God's involved in the world. He understands that God does look and bring judgment and punishment. And he understands creation. This next little passage is fascinating to me. You've made people like fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. Does that ring any bells to you? From the last time I was teaching here at Café, a long time ago, in Genesis. You read the description of Genesis, and this is the opposite. Because the fish of the sea do have a ruler. We're the ruler. And the Genesis passages were made ruler of the fish of the sea. Habakkuk, he must know the Genesis passage, and he's going to say, God, you're turning your own creation upside down here. That's not right. And he goes on to talk about idolatry, the idolatry of worshiping things that are our own might. We can go through Old Testament passage after Old Testament passage in which any kind of idolatry like that is totally condemned. And so, God, you can't do that. That's not who you are. I know you, God. Official prophet, maybe he does actually understand something about God. It's true. I will stand at my watch post, and I will station myself on the rampart. I will keep watch to see what he will say to me and what answer he will give to my complaint. My picture of Habakkuk is always standing on the wall and listening here with his hands folded, kind of, okay, God, what are you going to say about this? You can't be like that, God. That's where Habakkuk said, I identify. I'm guilty of having some of those same kinds of attitudes and thoughts about God. Where are you? Wait, you can't wait. You need to operate on the way I want you to operate, the way you should operate. Notice that Habakkuk knows God well enough to expect an answer. Habakkuk knows he's in a conversation with God, and he does. God, what are you going to say to my complaint? How are you going to respond to me? Because of my religious upbringing, I'm kind of built to do some of that too. Although I'm not sure I expect quite what Habakkuk got and how that went. So, God's second response. And it begins with an overview or a summary. God, says something. And the overview is, pay attention, write this down plainly. In fact, put it on tablets, and then there's an interesting translation issue because it's not clear whether write it on tablets so people running by can read it, or write it on tablets so messengers can run with it, or write it on tablets so people can see it and run. I mean, the Hebrew is possible to translate all those different ways. But the point is, make this plain. Habakkuk, read my lips. And then he goes on to say, be patient, wait, your timing. Tom's not patient, he said this morning. I'm certainly not a patient person. Patience has never been a gift that I've been accused of having in any way. But the message is, be patient and wait. And then he goes on to talk about a couple of the basic principles here. Wealth is treacherous. Arrogant people never have enough. And it begins to foreshadow God's answer to how God has built justice into the system. Right in the middle in this summary is the righteous live by their faith or by their faithfulness. Now this becomes the theme in Habakkuk. It gets picked up in Romans 1:17. Lots of scholars would say this is the thesis statement for Romans. In Romans, the text goes on to say, and what God has done is left people with their own devices. You engage in evil, and it has built-in consequences. But the righteous live by their faithfulness becomes the key. Well, from the overview summary, Habakkuk goes on to list 5 woes. And the first one is, woe to those who accumulate stuff at other people's expense. Woe to those who set their house on high, who make their house and their stuff secure, particularly if they do it at other people's expense. Woe to those who build community at other people's expense. The text is actually, woe to those who shed blood to build community. And then there's a little parenthesis in the middle of chapter 2. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of God. And then the woes continues. Woe to those who abuse their neighbor or abuse creation for their own personal experience and enjoyment, for their own sense of satisfaction. And finally, woe to those, Donna corrected this on the paper I handed out, but I didn't correct it here, sorry. To those who worship what they make and look to it for revelation. This is God's second answer to Habakkuk. It's about how the world is built and how it works. It ends with let all the earth be silent before God. Well, what do you think of that? You recognize any of those ideas? This iPhone right here, made by people. You ever open one up? It's filled with gold and silver. It's ironic. And none of us, of course, would look to it for revelation, but we have. Some estimate that, it's a high estimate, that almost 500,000 people died in the Iraqi war. And why was that the case? To make us secure, to make our oil available and reasonably cheap and that sort of thing. Coffee pickers make $2 to $3 a day, including the children that work with them. I enjoy my coffee. I think about it. The Americans are 5% of the world, less than 5% of the world population, and we consume 17% of the world's energy. Dane County is among the very worst places. This is the town we live in the nation. All your images of race kinds of issues, you think about other states, but right here, in our county, it's one of the worst places in the country for black people to live because of the kinds of oppression we experience. So, when we were working on Habakkuk, it was really easy to keep Habakkuk in Babylon and to talk about the abuses of the kings and the people in his day and that sort of thing. It wasn't our goal. Well, our question was, how does any of this stuff apply to us? What do we do with this? What are the issues of economic justice? What are the issues of the way I treat people? What are the implications that I don't see as an American living in our culture? What are some of those things that I might think about? And as we thought about it, I think, the next slide, yes, we began to think about some of the things that Jesus says. For those who want to save their life, to set their nest on high, they're going to lose it. It's those who let go of their lives are the ones that are going to live. You cannot serve both God and wealth. Jesus' words, indeed, the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up ramparts around you and surround you and hem you in on every side. They will crush you to the ground and your children within you, and they will not leave within you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation from God. I'm just getting started, friends. I could go on for a long, long time in Luke and Matthew and John and Mark, putting words of Jesus up here that sound an awful lot like the 5 loaves in the middle of the night. So our experience, oh my gosh, I've been a Christian all my life. Oh my gosh, I'm not looking at these kinds of things. Oh, this is long before Jesus, and in Jesus' time, some of the descriptions about how you live are the same. Well, Habakkuk responds with prayer. And it's kind of an amazing thing. It's called usually a theophany. And it's a neat word. It means a description of God coming into our world. And Habakkuk pulls from all of the Hebrew history he knows, images, and he mixes them together in this phenomenal poem to describe what it looks like when God comes. Listen for a moment.
Lord, I have heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds. May you in our day and our time make them known. In wrath, remember the mercy. God of fame from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Hermon. His glory covered the heavens and his praise filled the earth. His splendor was like the sunrise, rays flashed from his hand where his power was hidden. Plague went before him, pestilence followed his steps. He stood and shook the earth. He looked and made the nations tremble. The ancient mountains crumbled and the age-old hills collapsed. His ways are eternal. I saw the tents of Cushan in distress, the dwellings of Midian in anguish. Were you angry with the rivers, O Lord? Was your wrath against the streams? Did you rage against the sea when you rode with your horses and your victorious chariots? You uncovered your bow, you called for many arrows, you smoothed the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you writhed, torrents of water swept by. The deep roared and lifted its waves on high. Sun and moon stood still in the heavens at the glint of your flying arrows, at the lightning of your flashing spear. In wrath you strode to the earth, and in anger you threshed the nations. You came out to deliver your people, to save your anointed one.
out that this was actually part of the Habakkuk text. But that was a section of the soundtrack for the media show that we put together. And for us, as we thought about all these theophany images, we studied them and looked at them, and we realized they were all about God going forth to save his people. Well, that led us to Advent. Welcome to Advent. That led us to the picture of Jesus coming into our world to save us. It also turned it upside down. When you thought about the violence and all the stuff going on again, oh gosh, these sweet pictures of Mary and Joseph and the manger, maybe there's another angle to these that pushes a little bit. Habakkuk's response reminds me of this phrase, which some of us will hear from Malachi, during the Christmas season of the Messiah. Who can endure the day of his coming? Who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire. Habakkuk himself says, I hear. This is after the pot goes, and I tremble. My lips quiver at the sound. Rottenness enters my bones. My steps tremble beneath me. Literally, this is a picture of his knees knocking and shaking. I mean, that's the Hebrew poetic image. Habakkuk is terrified by the power and strength and judgment that God brings in Advent. However, though the fig tree does not blossom and there's no fruit on the vines, though the produce of the olive fail and the fields yield no foods, though the flock is cut off from the fold and there's no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice. I will exalt in the God of my salvation. God, the Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer and makes me tread on the heights. The picture here, the poetic picture is, have you ever watched a deer? A mountain goat up high and walks. They're amazing as they move from one place to another. And they say, you watch them and you're kind of exuberant. That's what Habakkuk is. Habakkuk looks at the judgment of his coming. And he says, for me, I'm beginning to realize that God is working our world in ways that I may or may not want. But I can trust. I can know what's going to happen. So, in the most despairing of situations that we can imagine or that we may fear, what do you imagine it looks like when God comes? Here we are in Advent season, the next month, thinking about God coming. What's your picture? Does it include some Habakkuk images? Where is your hope? The Chaldeans, their own might is their God. Habakkuk ends with God is my strength. What or who is your strength? Habakkuk really did change my life. And it was a really good experience to be. I don't remember well the meeting in which I got this week, but it made sense because of all the time I spent with Habakkuk. And it was a moving experience the last 2 weeks as I thought about standing here and talking about my experience with Habakkuk, taking me back to some of those issues, reinforcing some of the ideas and values that we had. Next week, I believe, Rich, is Ezra and Nehemiah, another couple of prophets that come from later, and then the following week we come back to Isaiah. Grace?
Thanks.
Where can we see the video?
Pardon?
Where can we see the video?
You can't.